Hilde Bjørkhaug is a sociologist. She holds a position as senior researcher at the Center for Rural Research here in Trondheim. She's been involved in research on different aspects of agricultural restructuring, sustainable agriculture, and food systems change. And she's the leader of the SAMKUL-project, of which I'm a part myself, called Frogs, Fuel, Finance, or Food: Cultures, Values, Ethics, Arguments, and Justifications in the Management of Agricultural Land, also known as For Food. And in her presentation, she will show how this project deals with questions of cultural valuation of agricultural land and reflect on conflicts of interest on agricultural land here in Norway. So please, Hilde.
So thank you very much for the introduction. Is it possible to manage land in a way where several interests can be preserved at the same time and with perspectives of a better future for both present and future generations? In this presentation, some of the current conflicts around agricultural land in Norway will be discussed. Frogs or food or both? Where is the public interest? Is there a public interest in this? But first I'll present the project where these questions are being addressed. So I don't have to repeat the long title as Siri already did. But For Food is the short name of the project, and I want to acknowledge all the project partners in the For Food team for the content of this presentation. So those are my colleagues at the Center for Research, Katrina Rønningen, Jostein Brobakk, and also Heidi Winge, our PhD student. Siri Østbø Sørensen, combine CRR and NTNU. Mai Thorseth, Siri, which we have seen today, and Alan Alvarez from Program of Applied Ethics at NTNU. Phil, as we just heard, Bruce Murrayhead, historian from University of Waterloo, and Jeff Lawrence from University of Queensland. So it's a large team that collaborate together to explore these issues. The context of the project is increasing competition on or for agricultural land, as Phil explained previously. First, food, the need for more production, increasing conflicts between what we call industrial farming and family farming systems. Feed, globally diets changes towards more meat consumption, and animals need feed. Industrial meat production is based on concentrated feed that are grown on land that often could be used for human feed directly. Increasing demand for biofuels as an alternative to fossil fuels is grown on same food land, which crops which could also be feed. This was also explained in the previous presentation of Phil, where he also mentioned the bioeconomy, how it competes on the same land resources, and financial speculation, how finances can be a threat to sustainable food systems, and in particular where power relations between finance, state, and land users, such as tenure farmers, are large. And of course, climate change represents a major risk and challenge to long-term food security. Droughts, flooding, other extreme weather events influence on food security. Added to this, changing demographics, population growth, urbanization raise questions of what land can be used for. And these issues needs to be negotiated between valuation of nature and culture. So this is conflicting approaches to land use. So in For Food we ask, how are these resource hierarchies culturally constructed as different interests and agendas compete for agricultural land? Together with our philosophers, it is important for food. It's an important food component to address ethical valuation in agricultural land governance. Urgent ethical challenges relate to the governance of natural resources, particularly in the view of global justice. Who should govern the resources, public or private interests? And at what level should these resources be governed? Is land grab morally legitimate? What kind of justice is to be preferred? And what time horizon applies to this, current or future generation? And I just learned from Alan here that Norway is, together with Japan and Bolivia, among the only countries which actually have written, who recognize the rights for future generation in their constitution. So that was quite a surprising new knowledge. But Norway is definitely interested in the issue, and it's interesting to see how it's dealt with. The Food Project, this figure show how different areas were chosen for food research on cultural valuation of agricultural land. So we heard on global debates and global food regimes in Phil's presentation. I just mentioned ethical valuation. We are also asking questions to what degree Norwegian financial development interest might influence on local and global food systems through Norfund and the Norwegian Pension Fund global activities. So we also saw that Norway is very much or can be involved in land grab in several ways, both through importing feed, but also through investment activities. So that's part of the project. But today, as food is the core topic, I'll focus on precondition aims for food production in Norway and conflicts in relation to realizing those in between agriculture, but also environmental values. So, why worry about food production in an oil-rich country so short of agricultural land that the cattle and sheep are sent into mountains to graze together with wolves and bears during summer? Question raised by Katrine. So that's pretty much, that's the context of Norwegian agriculture. There's a policy goal of increased domestic food production to meet population growth and increased demand of food. The current white paper on agriculture and food states that. So we have to ask where, by whom, or how is this going to be accomplished? We heard in Phil's presentation that post-crisis food regime led to a reformulation of food politics, and this was also the case in Norway. So this new policy of goal of increased food production is pretty much informed by the food crisis of 2007-2008. And it also incorporates both food security issues, but also food sovereignty. Food security as enough food for all people, as the World Food Summit defines it, but also the right to define how to produce it, how and where to produce it, the right to produce food in Norway. But interesting, also, this new policy is moving away from what used to be a multifunctional policy in Norway, politics of food and agriculture, into aims of what we call neo-productivist agriculture politics of producing more food. And for those who are interested in the Norwegian agriculture policy at the current, this process is just being sped up by focusing on industrial and intensifying food production. So why showing this picture from Trondheim, city built and growing on farmland? We are in Trondheim now, It's a city that expands on farmland, and the city needs housing itself, but also the surrounding areas with regions and their needs for industrial development, infrastructure, roads, trains, terminals to handle increasing loads of goods, etc. So that's the context of land use debates in this region. Here we see existence of land for grain production in some of the city suburbs around Trondheim. And these are where the current debates stand. But a bit more on the context of what you saw and the land around the city and in this region. The context is that Norway has 3% arable land possible for agricultural production. But only 1% of this area is suitable for growing grain, meaning crops that humans potentially could eat directly. The rest is for grazing animals. This land is currently decreasing. A new report by Stokstad Skube showed that there's been 21 reduction over the last 20 years in Norwegian grain area. Targeted policy instruments can provide increased production of grain on available land, another fresh report show. But that means available land, or land needs to be available. And if we don't have this land available, we need to increase our activity or import loads of grain. So that's the picture. If we reduce more, then we increase our dependence on imported feed and increase our red color, I guess, in the land grab picture outside. Where is the public interest in farmland development controversy in Norway? Agricultural land is limited as a resource, and it's locked in spatially in competition with urban growth. The major cities, Oslo, Stavanger, Trondheim, are located within the country's best agricultural areas. Norway was urbanized relatively late. Now very strong centralization development as well, and increasing in-migration from abroad. So there is a considerable pressure on remaining farmland. And there's a conflict between agricultural policy objectives for conserving farmland and increasing financial interest following the demand for housing, roads, and infrastructure. And this is becoming a major issue on public and political areas. So I find, based on interviews with stakeholders across on land across Norway, is that roads in particular is a public interest. Maybe not surprising, but it turns out as it's a public interest that is also accepted as a social, overall social interest in the Norwegian community. So we don't, there's no big debate on whether roads are or land is superior to roads and the other way around. Here we also see development of new roads through highly productive land in the photo. So one issue we want to address further in Forfood is why roads, and I think we can address this in this what was also mentioned as a trade liberalization regime, which I think Norway still is in, where the value of producing goods, the fast movement of goods, and cutting prices of goods enables this huge interest in infrastructure and better roads. But that needs to be explored further, of course. But there are also conflicts on why land is important or not. That complicates the public debates. So I'm showing here 2 newspaper articles, a couple of years old, that addressed, on one hand, housing, how important housing currently is, and how that they are much more important than, for instance, salamanders or frogs, red-listed creatures, or archaeological artifacts, facts like cooking equipment from hundreds of years ago, in competition with land. And the newspaper article on your left address another interesting phenomenon, that initiatives that address climate change challenges, such as certain city development project, might be a reason given for building on farmland. And I think that's climate change address quite a few interesting conflicts with what has been traditionally good environmentalist cases. And both examples here are media initiatives from members of political parties, so they've been on a political agenda. Frogs or food or both, is it possible to combine? And we do see with our collaborating partner in Canada that there are initiatives that try to incorporate both, like combined suggestions, like green belt zones for permanent protection of land area for food production, protection of nature, cultural heritage, but with aims of combining nature and heritage preservation with active activities based on active farming, for instance, or in combination with tourism. We have not seen an example where this has been successful in Norway, but we see new partnerships between environmental and farm interest for future generations when it comes to food preservation. And going back to the discussion after the 2 first presentations today on consumer trust and consumer interest, I think the lack of interest in agricultural land also is an example for the lack of consumer organization and consumer interest in food in Norway. There's been a much longer tradition for civil society initiative to protect environmental interest and together to work for environment and nature interest, while there still has been it's not been necessary in the Norwegian context for consumer to gather to be interested in food issues. But we heard from the audience today that there are some initiatives, and we also see initiatives here in soil preservation that environmental interests are joining forces with farmers' organizations on this issue. So, I'm finishing up now. Just addressing a point of where the For Food project and research can engage on the debate. And I think research like this can encourage public debate on cultural valuation on land use and land protection through research-based information on the larger contexts around the issues, alternatives and consequences. And I think we might have a role to encourage debate and follow the initiatives taken on the issue. So thank you very much for your attention.